Jinbei has a secret. About a month has passed since the end of Whole Cake Island and the beginning of the raid on Onigashima, and whilst we all took our seats in the audience to witness the gloriousome performance that was Acts 1 and 2 of Wano, Mr. Jinbei has been busy backstage setting up something big. His absence was purposeful, meaningful, and various other synonyms. What are you hiding, Jinbei? Is it under that rock? Let me see it. Jinbei? No, bad shark. Bad. Alright, I guess we're gonna have to do this the hard way. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam, and here's a secret. I unironically like St. Charlos as a character, because he does exactly what he's meant to do, which is be an insufferable pigman with a face that looks like a testicle just commencing puberty. And then you get to see him get smacked repeatedly. He's great. Someone who appreciates Charlos a lot less, though, is Jinbei, a sharkman who has legitimately had more impact on the series off screen than he has on screen. He's kind of like a secret agent of the One Piece world, even assigned with the codename 00 Melon, primarily due to his rounded shark meat physique. But Jinbei was asked to join the Straw Hats twice, and on both occasions he offered Luffy a formal resignation stating, "Dear Luffy-kun, I'd like to thank you very much for offering me the position of helmsman within the Straw Hat Pirates. However, after much consideration, I've decided to go swimming instead. YOLO swag, Jinbei." At least that's what he told us, because on both of these occasions, Jinbei has been putting in some serious work behind the scenes. And between Whole Cake Island and the raid on Onigashima, something pretty huge happened that, just like the meat and cheese of a kebab, is being kept under wraps. Also, here's a portrait of my dog staring at you and questioning your life's choices. And if you'd like to stop him judging you, then all you need to do is subscribe to the Grand Line Review, which will also result in consistent injections of One Piece culture being administered directly into your YouTube feed. Don't forget to say hi in the comments if you're new to the Grand Fleet, welcome. But also throughout this video, we will be furnishing Jinbei's new room aboard the Thousand Sunny. We will be doing this with your decor suggestions, the first of which being, he should have a pineapple bed. Yep, seems legit. And I can't wait to see this fully furnished room. So before we examine Jinbei's secret, I first need to make something quite clear. When it comes to storytelling, there are different perspectives to examine. One is the in-world events, what the characters say and do, and the other is the stagecraft of the author. Think of it like a theater. Whilst actors are performing and doing actorly stuff on stage, the crew are preparing for the next scene backstage. And in this case, Jinbei has spent most of the show that is One Piece as part of the backstage crew. The reason why he can't be on stage is because he has something very important to set up for the next scene. For example, his first absence occurred after Fishman Island, and the onstage reasoning for why he wasn't able to join the Straw Hats was because he had unfinished business, which we would come to learn was his duty to Big Mom and stuffing her face with this weird anthropomorphic crockenbush. However, his offstage reasoning was slightly more complex. Whilst on stage, the Dressrosa saga played out to great applause and I guess some boos if you were watching it weekly, but backstage, Jinbei was preparing all sorts of props for Whole Cake Island. He had to find a poneglyph, he had to recruit Wadatsumi, who would prove integral to the climax of Whole Cake Island, and he even had to preset Karabo for his involvement in Wano, all of which we learned through Jinbei's cover story. And just speaking of Wadatsumi, during the cover story, he was posing as an entity known as the Sea God, which I just thought I'd bring up because it's interesting. And the concept of gods in One Piece has become, well, rather unexpectedly important. But Jinbei's first absence did far more for both the story and his character than joining the Straw Hats right then and there ever could. For one thing, it emphasized how seriously he takes the concept of duty, but also it set him up to be a pretty incredibly important piece in Whole Cake Island. During that arc, Jinbei was the inside man, because he had complete trust within Totland and he was able to accomplish all sorts of tasks like saving Luffy from one of his many series imprisonments, as well as setting up the alliance between the Straw Hat Pirates and the Fire Tank Pirates, all of which are essential story functions that required him to spend a lot of time backstage. So Jinbei's initial rejection of joining the crew after Fishman Island had a lot less to do with his in-world reasons and much more to do with the technical functions of how Oda needed to structure his story. Another way of thinking about this is casting our minds back to soap operas or sitcoms. A lot of the time when characters are killed or, sent away, it's because of production reasons. It's not because that's where the story was naturally leading, but more because the actor just doesn't want to play the character anymore or the writers are sick of the character or something along those lines. But in stories that are significantly more well planned, like say One Piece, which is a good example because that's the thing we talk about on this channel, channel, but in stories like that, the production needs work in harmony with the narrative requirements. Jinbei went backstage after Fishman Island because Oda needed him to, and that paid off spectacularly. But why did he disappear again after Whole Cake Island? What was he setting up backstage that prevented him from joining the crew right then and there? Well, not having a fully furnished room would be one potential concern, so let's continue designing Jinbei's aquarium with an iron and ironing board to keep his vast number of kimonos free of creases and wrinkles. Also, I imagine a few of you at this stage will no doubtedly be thinking, why are we doing this, Mr. Internet Man? The Thousand Sunny already has an aquarium, he can just sleep there. But that is for storing fish to eat, and Jinbei is friend, not food. Meanwhile, back in world, the reason why Jinbei stayed behind was that he simply couldn't abandon his dude guys because of honor and bonds and stuff, and yeah, sure, it's a fine enough excuse, but Oda could have just as easily written it in the opposite direction, where the most honorable thing to do is to put trust in the Sun Pirates to do their job and survive, much like how Luffy places his complete trust in his own crew. When a Straw Hat says, "Go on ahead, Captain Dude, I got this," Luffy doesn't then go, "Oh mate, I don't know, this seems kinda dangerous, I should probably stay as well." The point is that Jinbei didn't stay behind because that was the only solution to the scenario. He stayed behind because Oda either needed him to accomplish a task before appearing on Wano, or that Jinbei's early presence on Wano would have hindered an essential plot point. For an example of the latter, the way the Whole Cake Island crew initially arrive on Wano is through a whirlpool that separates them, which very conveniently places Luffy on his own. However, if Jinbei had been there with them, then he logically would have saved each and every one of them, and they would have started Wano together as some sort of fishy family. That's one example where an author may need to keep a character absent. For another classic example of this, we can turn to Star Trek: The Next Generation, which featured a character who could quite literally read minds. However, she was always very conveniently absent when the plot needed a character to lie. But I don't think that was quite the case with Jinbei, because other than the beginning of Wano, his presence on the island, it really wouldn't have changed all that much about Acts 1 and 2 of Wano. And even with the whirlpool example, Oda could have easily written it in a way where Jinbei was able to save everyone but Luffy, who fell just out of grasp at the last second. So I'm very much forced to conclude that Jinbei was, once again, removed from the story so that he could do some backstage setup that we are not currently privy to. All we know is when he shows up on stage again. And let's just linger on that for a bit, because Jinbei's reappearance is, it's one of the most ridiculous moments in all of One Piece. He comes back in chapter 796 with a heroic entrance at the exact perfect time to join the raid. Just a couple of questions though. How did he know when and where the raid was taking place? And in fact, how did he even know that there was going to be a raid? Let's add what to the when and where. None of the Whole Cake Island crew knew about the raid plan before they arrived on Wano. And even the Fart Samurai architect of said plan didn't know which port the Allied forces were supposed to be meeting at. So I can accept that Jinbei knows how to get to Wano. He is a very wise and seasoned sushi after all. And I guess if worse came to worse, he could just probably ask local fish for directions. But how did he know the exact time and place he needed to be to join a raid that he didn't know existed? Because right now the answer is that he coincidentally arrived at this exact time in this exact spot, and there is not a word in the English language for how ridiculously serendipitous this is. It's one of those moments where you really can't do too much critical thinking because, you know, it ruins the fun story. Much like Jinbei's feng shui, if we don't get this room up and running with another design choice being a poster of Fishman Nami. And I really don't want to know what he does with that. What I want to know is the reason behind his currently flimsy story. And to pose a great contrasting narrative, have you heard of pineapples? Because Marco the Phoenix has more or less the same story, except in this analogy, Jinbei is unemployed, and Marco is a lucrative small business owner because only one of them makes sense. Marco was late to the raid because he was doing stuff on the Sphinx Island, but also because he spent time looking for Izo. Meanwhile, Marco knew exactly where and when to show up because Nekomamushi was with him, who knew the general raid plan. And once they arrived on Wano, they immediately contacted the other vassals to organize a place to meet. That place being the big F-off Skull in the Sea, because as far as landmarks go, that's a pretty noticeable one. Compare that to Jinbei, who arrived on his own, was late for no good reason, didn't even know about the raid, but who still managed to show up at an even more perfect time and place than Marco's team. And with that in mind, I suppose Jinbei's favorite song is Kesh's TikTok, because apparently the party don't start till he walks in. But much like seafood in general, I just don't buy it. Especially when you look at Jinbei's excuse. He states that he was late because he was tending to the wounded sun pirates, and then, and I quote, having a big send-off. Basically, Jinbei was late to Wano because he was too busy partying. which is very irresponsible of a man who is quite typically not that, particularly when you consider the time involved. I've said that from the end of Whole Cake Island to the beginning of the raid is roughly a month of in-world time, which we know because both of those evenings contain a full moon, so we can use the fun fictional lunar cycle. So Jinbei really took his time getting to Wano. When in-world, what he really should have done was made sure that all of his crew were alive and recovering, and then swim his well-rounded fish butt straight to Wano as quickly as possible. Who knows, maybe he got a bit too high on the old seaweed during that party and just lost track of time. But even though Jinbei didn't know about the raid, he certainly knew that his new crew were fighting an old emperor, and that he probably doesn't have the luxury of taking his sweet time. As it's presented to us, it's not great writing in my opinion, which is why I give Oda the benefit of the doubt here. To implement something this kind of clunky in what is usually a very tight series, there must have been a backstage purpose for Jinbei's absence. But as for Jinbei's private space, our next set design element is a fork. Simple and effective. It certainly is a conversation starter. Like, dude, what's with the fork? And I don't know, however regular people talk to each other. To put this bizarre arrival into context though, the week where Jinbei showed up again in the manga, the online community was rather appropriately flooded with conspiracy theories. And one was that this Jinbei was actually a drawing made by Kanjuro. And even though Kanjuro had never met Jinbei before and thus probably wouldn't be able to draw him, this idea was seen as almost as reasonable as this shark just popping up again out of nowhere. Another intriguing idea was that Jinbei is actually lying. He wasn't late due to wound tending and hardcore partying, but he was actually delayed due to the Sun Pirates being killed in the battle against Big Mom. And so Jinbei spent his time grieving before he was finally ready to join Luffy. I don't think that one's too likely though, because yeah, it's super dark and depressing and just not quite in line with what One Piece tends to be. So I think it's far more likely that, similarly to his cover story, Jinbei met someone or found something on his particular journey that Oda would not have been able to implement by just having him escape aboard the Sunny. And this may not necessarily be something that pays off during Wano. He may have been absent during most of Wano in order to set up for the next saga. Perhaps he found a clue to the final road poneglyph that his home island used to hold. Maybe he ran into the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Potentially he was halted by some sort of red-headed shanks? Or could Jinbei have had some kind of interaction with the Germa that will only pay off in the future? And who knows, is Caesar Clown involved? I hope not, but maybe. The options are about as endless as the sea itself, by which I mean clearly limited, but not in a way that our minds can easily quantify. Much like the missing centerpiece of Jinbei's aquarium, because he needs a small liquor cabinet, handmade from artful driftwood pieces. Jinbei's Jinbei, which I imagine is also adorned with many emergency Sakazuki, by which I mean both the cups and the head of Sakazuki himself. But you let me know what you think Jinbei's secret is, and then go on to check out this video because it's good and I like it and I like you, so I look forward to seeing you there.